Good morning. In the bulletin, if you notice, the title says it's time to be thankful, ... again. And that's kind of a running joke. There was a cartoon a few years ago that Harvey put up here, and it said, "Has it already been a year since we've been thankful?" And it just struck me funny because, this is Thanksgiving time, but we're to be thankful all the time, not just on the fourth Thursday of November. God has done so much for us that we're to always be thankful. And the Bible tells us that. If you look at 1 Thessalonians, in chapter 5, Paul gives some instructions to Christians about living. And beginning with 5:16, it says, "Rejoice always, pray without ceasing. In everything give thanks, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. Do not quench the Spirit. Do not despise prophetic utterances, but examine everything carefully. Hold fast to that which is good. Abstain from every form of evil." But verse 18, "In everything give thanks, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus." And my Bible notes on this say, Christians are differentiated from the natural man because of what God has done. They are continually thankful, whatever the circumstances. And I think the video that Harvey showed here, that talks to that, doesn't it? It's easy to be thankful when things are going good, but when things aren't going so good, maybe not so much. And yet the Bible still tells us, be thankful in all circumstances. And we don't really have to look real far, do we, to see what we have to be thankful for, even though we may be in the midst of some troubles and difficult situations. So let's be thankful. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about some miracles in the Bible, and I guess you'd say my take on how they relate to being thankful. There's two from the Old Testament and one from the New Testament. Before I do that, I'd just like to kind of remind everybody, and you probably all know this, but here in America we celebrate Thanksgiving. And it started actually 400 years ago this year. It was 1621. It was the first Thanksgiving with the Pilgrims and I learned it was the Pilgrims and the Indians, but Native Americans, indigenous people, whatever term you prefer to use, that we celebrated Thanksgiving. And you remember the Mayflower took off in September of 1620 with about 102 people. And by the time they got here the next winter, they'd lost half of those people. I mean, they didn't survive. Now, when they arrived, they were greeted by Squanto and different Indians that originally greeted them and kind of taught them about the land and how to survive here in America and different things. And so in November of that year, in 1621, they sat down and they had a Thanksgiving feast. Probably didn't look like ours. That I read somewhere they had fish and different things that we probably whatever was handy to them at the time. But nevertheless, they took time to give thanks despite all the hardships that they had. They were a religious people and they gave thanks. And then of course here in our country, when we got formed, George Washington was the first president for the national government to set aside a proclamation of Thanksgiving. And then some other presidents followed suit. John Adams and James Madison did the same thing. It was in 1817, New York was the first state to adopt an annual Thanksgiving holiday. And in 1827, a lady named Sarah Josepha Hale, she was an author. In fact, one of her poems, Mary Had a Little Lamb. She was the author of Mary Had a Little Lamb. In 1827, she launched a campaign to establish Thanksgiving as a national holiday, and it took 36 years, but in the middle of the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln declared a national holiday for Thanksgiving. And then it was formalized actually just in the 40s to be the fourth Thursday of November. So we have a long history here of having a period of Thanksgiving in our history, going way back 400 years ago to the Pilgrims, and then even from the first president on down, there were movements to start it. And it was kind of interesting. If I knew it, I'd forgot that the lady Sarah Josepha Hale was the one who kind of was the spearhead of of getting Thanksgiving declared a national holiday. They call her the Mother of Thanksgiving. So that's kind of an interesting history of why we celebrate at this time. But again, as I mentioned, I wanted to mention some miracles in the Bible and see what they say to us about Thanksgiving. Two of them are in the Old Testament. One, we go way back to the book of Joshua. In Joshua chapter, well, it actually begins towards the end of chapter 3. But Joshua, led the Israelites into the promised land. Moses wasn't allowed to do that, and so God brought Joshua to do that. And they're getting ready to go over to cross the Jordan. It says, "So when the people set out from their tents to cross the Jordan with the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant before the people, and when those who carried the ark came into the Jordan, and the feet of the priests carrying the ark were dipped in the edge of the water, for the Jordan overflows all its banks all the days of harvest, the waters which were flowing down from above stood and rose up in one heap a great distance away from Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan. And those which were flowing down toward the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, were completely cut off. So the people crossed opposite Jericho. And the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood firm on the dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel crossed on dry ground until all the nation had finished crossing the Jordan. Now when all the nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, 'Take for yourselves 12 men from the people, 1 man from each tribe, and command them, saying, Take up for yourselves 12 stones from here out of the middle of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet are standing firm, and carry them over with you, and lay them down in the lodging place where you will lodge tonight.' So Joshua does that. He says to them, 'Cross again to the ark of the Lord your God in the middle of the Jordan, and each of you,' he calls the 12, and says to each of you, 'Take up a stone on his shoulder according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Israel.'" So, see, God is leading them over, and he performs this miracle. The waters open up. We all know the story of the Red Sea. Well, as they went to cross over into the Promised Land, the Jordan River does the same thing. God performs this amazing miracle. And the priests cross over, and they're standing there in the middle on dry ground, and everybody crosses over. And Joshua tells them, the Lord said, go in where they're standing in the middle of the sea, the 12 leaders of the tribes, and gather these 12 stones. And you're going to take them where you sleep tonight. So that's one miracle. Let me go to another miracle you'll find here in Daniel. And this is right in the beginning of the book of Daniel. You remember Daniel, of course, from the lion's den. But this is chapter 2. And King Nebuchadnezzar, who is the king, he has this dream. And the king said to them, "I had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to understand the dream." So he wants someone to interpret the dream for him. And so the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, "O king, live forever. Tell the dream to your servants, and we will declare the interpretation." Okay, so if you want to know what the dream said, tell us what it was, right? The king replied to the Chaldeans, "The command from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be made a rubbish heap. But if you declare the dream and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts and a reward and great honor. Therefore declare to me the dream and its interpretation." They answered a second time and said, "Let the king tell the dream to his servants, and we will declare the interpretation." The king replied, "I know for certain that you are bargaining for time, inasmuch as you have seen that the command from me is firm. That if you do not make the dream known to me, there is only one decree for you have agreed together to speak lying and corrupt words before me until the situation is changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, that I may know that you can declare to me its interpretation." So he's saying, tell me what the dream said. Okay, what was the dream? Just tell me what it said. Okay, well, what was the dream? He's not even telling him. He wants them to read his mind, or else they're going to die. And it goes on a little bit. Verse 12 says, "Because of this, the king became indignant and very furious, and gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they looked for Daniel and his friends to kill them. Then Daniel replied with discretion and discernment to Arioch, the captain of the king's bodyguard, who had gone forth to slay the wise men. He said to Arioch, the king's commander, for what reason is the decree from the king so urgent? Then Arioch informed Daniel about the matter. So Daniel went in and requested of the king that he would give him time in order that he might declare the interpretation to the king. Then Daniel went to his house and informed his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, about the matter, so that they might request compassion from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed when the rest of the wise men, with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. So Daniel, he didn't know what the king's dream was either, but he knew who to go to. He went to God and prayed about it, to let me know what this is, so that he doesn't put us to death too for not reading his mind and telling him what the dream meant. And then I want to go to the New Testament here. There's one more miracle here, and this one I'm sure you're familiar with as well. Jesus in Luke 17, beginning of chapter 11, says, while he was on the way to Jerusalem, he was passing between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 leprous men who stood at a distance met him, and they raised their voices, saying, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. When he saw them, he said to them, go and show yourselves to the priest. And as they were going, they were cleansed. So these 10 lepers come to Jesus, asked to be cleansed, and he says, okay, go to the priest. That was a custom they had in the church at the time. So, go to the church, and as they were walking to the church, to the temple, they were being cleansed. All 10 lepers were being cleansed. So here's 3 different miracles in 3 different settings. We have the Israelites crossing the Jordan, being led, the water separating, walking across on dry land, being led to the Jordan. We have Daniel interpreting the dream of a king, and he doesn't even tell him what the dream is about. I mean, how hard is it to interpret a dream anyway, let alone when you don't know what it's about? And then we have Jesus cleansing these lepers, and leprosy, as you know, back then was a horrible disease that they couldn't cure, and people had to be isolated, and it was really awful. What does this have to do with thankfulness? Well, I didn't read the rest of the story to you, as Paul Harvey used to say. In the story with Joshua, where they gathered the stones, remember they gathered the stones out of the middle of the river. What they did with the stones, and this is what by God's command, in verse 19, it says, now the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th of the first month and camped at Gilgal on the eastern edge of Jericho. Those 12 stones which they had taken from the Jordan, Joshua set up at Gilgal. He said to the sons of Israel, when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what are those stones? Then you shall inform your children, saying, Israel crossed the Jordan this day on dry land, on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had crossed, just as the Lord your God had done to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed. That all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, so that you may fear the Lord your God forever. God wanted them to set up this memorial, and Joshua followed the rules because he wanted people to remember what had been done. Not just the children of Israel, but other peoples too, to see how great God is and what he accomplished. And I think this comes into thankfulness because how often are we not thankful because we forget about great things that happened in our lives? We forget about great things that might be going on today because we're faced with this big problem that's standing in our way. They build this memorial, and how easy is it to forget? All you have to do is read through the Old Testament and see what a short time period passes by when the children of Israel forget and start following other gods, and they forget about what God did for them. It's important for us to keep these traditions and keep these memorials, if you will, to remember of what we have to be thankful for. If we just go day to day, aimlessly, we're going to forget and just get preoccupied by the problems we have today. Again, in that video, it talks about it's easy to be thankful when everything's going wonderful, but when things get hard, that's where our focus goes. That's where our problem needs to be solved right now. We forget about all the good things that happened. Here's a miracle that God performed for these people. They set up a memorial, and hopefully it reminds some people, yeah, God is great. He still is great. Look at what he's done for us in the past and what he continues to do. Now, what about Daniel? You know, Daniel here comes up with, interprets the dream. And I'm not going to read the whole interpretation because it's lengthy. If you want to go back to Daniel, it's in chapter 2. You can read that. But have you ever had a good idea about something? Maybe you're meeting with somebody at work or church or wherever, and you're trying to figure out a solution to something, and you're the one that comes up with an idea. Oh, well, why don't we try this? And it's like, yeah, that's a good idea. And you think, you feel pretty good about yourself, right? You came up with a good idea. You know, some people might even brag about themselves. Hey, look what I did. Well, you know what Daniel did? Let me read to you what Daniel did. Again, remember, he's interpreting a dream, and he doesn't even know what the dream is because he goes to God, and God reveals it to him. And so here's what Daniel says after that. Let the name of God be blessed forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. It is he who changes the times and the epochs. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to men of understanding. It is he who reveals the profound and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise. For you have given me wisdom and power. Even now you have made known to me what we requested of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. How about that? To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise. Daniel was probably glad he came up with this solution, but he knows where it came from. It came from God. He wasn't taking credit for himself. It wasn't some special thing, look how good I am. It was from God. He knows where his power comes from, and he gives thanks and praise to God for this miracle that occurred. And it's important that we do that, isn't it? When we're thinking about giving thanks. I think we all feel good when we do a job well, a job well done. I think we all can be happy about that. But at the end of the day, if we're going to give thanks, or at the end of the day, we know where our power comes from. We need to give thanks to God for that. And in the last one, in the 10 lepers, and you probably already know the answer here, or not the answer, but how it ends, Jesus heals 10 lepers. And the story continues with verse number 15. It says, Now one of them, when he saw that he had been healed, turned back, glorifying God with a loud voice. And he fell on his face at his feet, giving thanks to him. And he was a Samaritan. Now, the Samaritan and Jews didn't get along, but the one guy who was healed here, he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus answered and said, Were there not 10 cleansed? But the 9, where are they? Was no one found who returned to give glory to God except this foreigner? And he said to him, Stand up and go, your faith has made you well. Jesus heals 10 people, and one comes back to say thank you. One comes back to give glory to God. What happened to the other 9? I guess there's 9 different reasons maybe why they didn't come back. But why do people not say thank you? Why do people not give thanks? I don't know. Were they embarrassed? Maybe, sometimes people don't give thanks because they expect stuff. It's like, why should I say thank you? I shouldn't have had this in the first place. So, finally it's gone. I don't know. Maybe they were embarrassed. Have you ever been embarrassed about saying thank you? I know when I was a kid, if I get a gift from somebody that we didn't see often, I'd have to write a thank you note. And I can't say that was my favorite activity, but it was useful, and I'm glad I got taught that because, people appreciate being thanked. I don't know what the reason was, but the Lord healed 10 people from this horrible disease. 1 came back to give thanks. What's the reason for that? I don't know. And so I just mentioned these items here today because the Bible, throughout the Bible, if you read Psalms, it's about praising God and thanking God. Paul's writings consistently, he's saying thank you. And we were talking in Sunday school today about how thankful he is for the people that were in the churches. He constantly mentions different people in his writings, people whose names aren't necessarily familiar to us. But he says, I pray for you all the time, and I thank God that you're there and that you're doing his work. And he just expresses this thanks over and over again. The Bible is full of this, and that's why I say in the beginning, our title of the sermon today, we joke about saying, about being thankful once a year. The Bible tells us to be thankful all the time. And I hope we are. I mean, I look at myself, I hope that I'm thankful all the time, even though we get consumed with our problems. One of the traditions we have here is saying thank you at this time of year, is we sit down and everybody gets a pen and pencil and writes down things they're thankful for. I don't know about some of you who've done this before. You may know where last year's list is. I don't, but occasionally I'll run across some of my old lists, and it's interesting because some of the things that were on the list from years ago are ones that I'm still thankful for today. So it's interesting. As you write this list, keep in mind this is your list. It's not anybody else's. You're welcome to share your, some of the things you're thankful for. We'll ask for that, but it's your list. So put what you want. I did want to say, Jimmy Fallon, the comedian on the Tonight Show, he has a tradition on Friday nights. He does what he writes thank you notes, and he'll sit there. Of course, it's a bit that he does. But he'll sit there and he has a little thank you card and pretends like he's writing a thank you note. And here's some of the things that he says about being thank you. Now it's supposed to be funny, it's obviously. He says, "Thank you, yard sales, for being the perfect way to say to your neighbors, we think we're important enough to charge money for our garbage." Or "Thank you, hard taco shells, for surviving the long journey from factory to supermarket to my plate and then breaking the moment I put something inside you." Or "Thank you, people who say, wow, you're really photogenic," for not saying what you really mean. "Wow, you're really ugly in person." Or "Thank you, fantasy football draft, for letting me know that even in my fantasies, I'm bad at sports." So anyway, those are just some comical things to, obviously, but let's take a few moments and write down things that we have to be thankful for.